Hi, welcome back to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in a previous video, we learned the family version of Flashpoint Fire Rescue by Indie Boards and Cards. But here, we're going to learn the included experience mode, which builds on those concepts that we previously learned. So if you haven't seen that original video, I'll put a link to it in the description of this one. But for now, let's go to the table and learn how to play. To set up, place the board on the table and add the doors to their indicated spaces as before. Now choose a difficulty, either Recruit, Veteran, or Heroic, and collect the indicated number of Hazmat Tokens and then perform the required number of explosions. To resolve the first explosion, roll the black 8-sided die and consult this section of the setup. Let's say I rolled a 1. I'm now told to treat this as coordinates red 3 and black 3, which I'll mark on the board here for easy reference. And then in that space, you'll place a fire marker as well as one of these hotspot tokens. You now also resolve an explosion from this location. We went over explosions in the previous video, so you know once it's resolved, it will look like this. For the second explosion, roll both dice again until you get a space that doesn't already contain a fire token in it. Then you'll repeat the process again, adding a fire token and hotspot, resolving an explosion there. For the third explosion, instead, flip the black die over to its opposite side and then roll the red die again. If the space rolled already had a fire in its location, just keep re-rolling the red die until you get a space without fire. Then place fire and a hotspot, resolving another explosion. If you're playing on heroic difficulty, you'll assign a fourth explosion, this time rolling both dice until you get a space anywhere in the house that doesn't currently contain fire. These are Hazmat Tokens. Assign each to a space by rolling dice for each one until you get spaces that do not already contain fire. Return to the box 1 false alarm and 2 victim tokens, and then shuffle the rest and roll dice to assign 3 of them, as I've done here, to 3 separate fire-free spaces. Now each player collects a firefighter figure, the matching colored player card, and a single specialist card of their choice. These will each provide the players with their own unique abilities that they can use during the game as appropriate. How these are used are clearly explained here, but if you have any questions, they're also talked about in more detail in the rulebook, and I'll leave that for you to discover on your own. We're only playing with 2 firefighters, but if you were playing with 3, roll dice until you get 2 hotspot-free locations and add a single hotspot token to each. Or instead, roll to place 3 new hotspots if you have 4 or more firefighters. Either way, then roll and add 3 more hotspots if you're playing at the veteran or heroic difficulty level. Finally, place 6 of the remaining hotspots onto these spaces of the board, or 12 if you're playing heroic level difficulty. Players can now put their firefighters on any spaces outside the building. Then as a group, players decide on which matching colored spaces they want to place 1 ambulance and 1 engine. And you can also place these on spaces that already have a player in them. For example, we could put this one right here. Then players decide on a start player or pick the youngest if a decision can't be reached. And that's the setup for the experienced mode. With these new rules, you'll still have all of the same action options as before, along with some new ones. So let's go back to the table and we'll learn how we use these vehicles. For 2 action points, a player on either space of the fire engine's parking spot can choose to drive it in either direction to the next matching parking spot. Let's say for a moment that the blue player here was on this space. They could then drive the fire engine to the space here. When they arrive, they can hop off the vehicle in either of the 2 spaces. And it should be noted, if you choose to drive the engine and there's another player in one of those 2 spaces, they can hop on and drive along with you for free. There's no limit to the number of players that can travel in the fire engine. The ambulance works the exact same way, except a firefighter does not have to be inside of it to drive. You can think of it as if they're radioing the ambulance to move. That said, if a firefighter is in its space and then someone radios the ambulance to move, the firefighter can choose to travel with that vehicle. In this experienced mode of the game, victims are only rescued if they move into a space with the ambulance, or if the ambulance moves into their space while they're waiting in one of the ambulance's parking spots. But now let's go back to the fire engine, because this is not just used for driving around the building. You can also use its powerful hose to blast water into the house. Notice that the house is divided into quadrants shaped by red dashed lines. A firefighter in either of the engine spaces can spend 4 action points to target the quadrant that it's parked inside of, as long as there are no firefighters on any spaces of that portion of the building. Now you'll roll dice to determine the hose's target space. If the value you rolled would put you outside of that quadrant, simply flip the die face over as required to then be a valid space. All fire or smoke in that space, or the adjacent 4 spaces, as long as they're not separated by walls, are then removed from the board. Keep in mind, hotspots are never removed. These represent areas of the building that have already gotten too hot to cool down properly. As mentioned earlier, each player now has a specialist card in front of them which provides unique actions they can take, but it also introduces a new general action called Crew Change. If a firefighter starts its turn in the same space as the engine, then as their first action they may spend 2 action points and swap their current specialist card with any other one not currently in play. You'll now have the new specialist's ability, along with any remaining action points less the 2 that you spent for the crew change. This introduces another change compared to the family version of the game, where normally each player has 4 action points to spend each turn. Now, however, the number of action points you have to spend is indicated here in the upper left-hand corner of your specialist card. Some have 5, some have 4, and this one here has 3. In some cases, the special ability itself will also provide you with some additional action points that you can spend for specific circumstances. Those are the new actions, and you'll see them listed here on the player aid in yellow, but there are also some changes to the advanced fire step, which we'll go over now. One thing I'm sure you've noticed is the introduction of these hotspot tokens. During the advanced fire step, if the space that you rolled has one of these hotspot tokens, then after placing the appropriate threat or resolving an explosion and shockwave, you'll then roll for an additional advanced fire. And if this targets another hotspot area, then again, after placing tokens or resolving explosions and shockwaves, keep rolling even more advanced fires until eventually you target a space without a hotspot. Anytime there's a flare-up like this, even if there are several of them in a single turn like I illustrated here, you now add a single hotspot token to the final space that you targeted from any of those that we stored here. So just to be clear, even if we triggered 5 flare-ups, you'd still only place a single new hotspot into the final space. If all of the ones collected here on the side of the board ever run out, you no longer need to add new hotspot tokens to the board. Also, once placed, they're never removed, and they have no specific effect on smoke or fire markers that are placed into those spaces, aside from triggering flare-ups, as I've just described. Remember, after rolling for new fire placement and resolving any explosions, flare-ups, and shockwaves, smoke will turn into fire if it's adjacent to fire. After that is resolved, if there's ever fire on a space with a hazmat token, there's an explosion in that space. This occurs first after removing the hazmat token and returning it to the box, and replacing it with a hotspot token. An explosion in this case would put fire here, fire outside the building through this open door, fire in a space with a point of interest, which unfortunately is a victim, and then, although you can't see it, fire would also get placed in a shockwave in this direction. If several hazmat explosions would trigger in the same phase, players can decide the order in which they occur. Before a hazmat explodes, these tokens can be carried just like victims with all the same restrictions, but are then discarded from play as soon as they are carried outside of the building. When firefighters are knocked down in the experienced game, they are now placed in either of the 2 spaces of the ambulance's current parking spot. In the Replenish Points of Interest step, when rolling to place a new one, they may now not be placed in a space with fire, smoke, a firefighter, or another point of interest. If this would happen, for example, we've rolled a 7 and a 2 here, which would target a smoke space, you would instead look at the space you rolled for and then move them to the next space as indicated by the arrow in the bottom right-hand corner. Getting in closer, we can see the arrow is pointed diagonally in this direction, so we would place the new point of interest here. But if this was also not a valid location, we would then follow the arrow in that space and continue along until we found a valid space. If no valid spot could be found, then you re-roll and try again. And that's everything you need to know to play Flashpoint Fire Rescue using the experienced rules. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. But until the next episode, thanks for watching.